Hello and welcome to Fortinac 8.3 Training, Session 4, Visibility. In this session, we're going to take a look at visibility of both users and endpoints, as well as some logging and reporting capabilities of the Fortinac. In this first section, we'll learn about how elements are organized within the database for visibility, as well as how to use the administrative visibility views. Elements are organized within the database in a hierarchical structure for relationships, where we have users that either own or are logged onto devices. Those devices have applications as well as adapters. So there's really four tiers here. There's the user, there's the device, there's the application, and there's the adapter. And as we'll see when we look at the administrative views, there are four individual views, each one specific to one of these layers of visibility. So there's two possible associations between a user and a device. We can either be tracking users through domain logon and things like that, so that the user has a temporary association with a particular device. They're logged on right now, and when they log off, they're no longer associated with that device. Or we can have a permanent association between a user and a device, and this would be for BYOD, guest, and contractor situations, where the user onboards the device, or the device is onboarded as being owned by that user, and that association stays permanent. Regardless of what user may be using a device at any given time, it would always have the ownership back to the original user. Then we have our host or device visibility. So this will include the physical and adapters, as well as the physical addresses and the IP addresses and what type of media, whether it's wired or wireless, host name, operating system information, and of course all the applications that are installed on that device if we're choosing to gather that information. And then there's just derived information, really. There's location information that the Fortinac knows the point of connection, and then there's the connection times, which are maintained by the Fortinac for 90 days by default, and it keeps track of where a device was connected, when it was connected there. There is a difference, at least as far as the way things are organized in the database, between what may be considered a device and what would be a device as far as a host, an end user device. So in this example, we see in the database, we have a simple device like a camera. This is more like an IoT device or something like that, where this camera has an adapter that connects to the network. And that's really the visibility we have. We have some information about the camera, and we have information about its adapter that's connected. And on the right-hand side, we see a more complete view of an actual user-owned host. So in this case, Bob Jones has a system, is perhaps logged on, if we're user tracking, onto this system with the host name MKT_22. And that system has a layer of visibility below it where we may have an agent or some sort of app installed, email app is installed. So we could have all that application information, which would probably be a lot more than you'd see here. And then we also have all the adapter information. So we have a wireless adapter and a wired adapter we see in this situation. So we have really those four layers of visibility on the right. We have the user level, Bob Jones. We have the device level, MKT_22. We have the application level, an agent or an email application. And we have the adapter level, wired and wireless, as they're shown on the right side. Now, with these four different administrative views, we have four different ways to get there. A different way for each view. So under the user menu, we can select user view to access the user view administrative screens. And under the host menu, we can get to adapter view, application view, and the host view itself. So each of these options really brings us to pretty much the same view. It's just got four different tabs, and it depends which method you use to get there, which tab is active upon arrival. But they really all do go to pretty much the same view. Now, before we get into each of the individual views and taking a look at them, there's a couple things I want to discuss here, and we're gonna look at. First off, we offer powerful filtering capabilities. So the Fortinet lets you build filters to find what you're looking for in each of those different views. And this is really important because we could have thousands upon thousands of users and devices and applications, of course, and in adapters. There's just so much information contained within the Fortinet database that we need some sort of really powerful filtering capability to find exactly what we're looking for as easily as possible. And then once you find what you're looking for, there's normally you're looking for it for a reason. So the Fortinet gives you quick access to some control capabilities and some information gathering capabilities right from the filter results. So you can find what you're looking for quickly, get information about what it is you found quickly, or take actions on what you found quickly. And we'll take a look at each of those in detail. First, let's take a look at the filtering capabilities. So each of those four views we can go to: host view, or adapter view, application view, user view. Over in the right side of each of those views, there is a search field, and there are several options available from a drop-down. Now, when you first come into the view, the quick filter is going to be the default selection, and that search field is going to be highlighted in blue, meaning it's ready immediately as soon as the view loads for you to start typing in for to create a quick filter. And as you see on the left under the first bullet, quick filter, a quick filter allows us to search based on IP address, MAC address, host name, username, and user ID. We can use wildcards as well, so you could put a partial IP address, a partial physical address, a partial host name, and so on. Now we can also use brackets and commas if we want to OR information. So I could do a left bracket, an IP address, comma, another IP address, comma, another IP address, and then a close bracket, and it would find all of those IP addresses. And we can even use wildcards within each of those criteria, within the brackets, and we can use an exclamation point to not the entire search. So we could say everything except what I have listed within my brackets. Now, a custom filter allows us to get extremely granular, and we're going to take a look at the details of that custom filter creation. But that allows us to build a filter keying upon any attribute of user, host, adapter, application. And we can also save custom filters if we choose to after they've been created. A new filter is created exactly in the same manner as a custom filter. And the new filter, you supply a name before you actually create the filter, and that will also be saved. Filters that have been created can be imported or exported for distributed environments. And at the bottom part of the dropdown, we're going to have all the previously created and saved filters. There are some there by default. So let's take a look at building one of these filters. When you go to create a custom filter, you'll see a screen just like this. And this window has the four different tabs: adapter, host, user, and application. And within these tabs, we can select any of the attributes we want to key on. As you see here, I've selected IP address. And within the field that we enter what we're trying to key on, we can use wildcards and all the other capabilities I mentioned before in the quick filter. So in this example, this would return all hosts within the 192.168.102 subnet. It would actually return all adapters, but those adapters would be associated with hosts. If we choose more than one option on this screen, then those options will be ANDed together. So it'll be logical AND. When we choose the host tab, you can see we have a lot of options here. So we have status attributes we can key on, or status conditions. And we have time, such as when the host was created or when it's due to expire and things like that. There's a policy section where we can search based on agent information or access values like role and security access attribute. There's the MDM section, so we can, if we've got our integration configured with an MDM. We can leverage information there as well. And then at the bottom under miscellaneous, you can leverage just about anything about the host itself, the host name, and any only host registered to particular users. On the right-hand column, you can see there's a device type. That could be used, say, hey, I just want a filter that's going to find all of my IP cameras or all of my card readers or all of my online card readers or things like that. So it can almost be used as a way to create quick, real-time reports, so to speak, of what is currently connected or currently not connected in our environment. The user tab lets us key on user attributes. A lot of this information would be information that had been gathered from, say, an Active Directory LDAP integration. We can also see creation and expiration and inactivity times and last time a user was logged in or logged out of a system. And at the top, users can be enabled or disabled. We could key on that. So just like the others, a lot of options, and just like the other tabs, if you select more than one to key on, more than one attribute, it is ANDed to any other attribute. And you can also use wildcards and things like that in the fields where you enter information that you're searching for. And the application tab lets you create a filter based on, say, name, vendor, version, operating system, and so on. And we can use the wildcards and logic we discussed earlier in these fields as well. And just like before, if we select more than one, then they are ANDed together. And that actually applies across all the different tabs. So everything in the adapter tab I've configured is ANDed together, and that is ANDed to everything in the host tab and user tab and application tab. So everything's ANDed across the tab. So we can get extremely granular with the creation of our filters. So here's the user view. So I've gone under the user menu and selected users view. And you'll see on the right hand side I have some results of a search. Now on the far right there's the drop down for our filter options. It's set to edit right now because I've already selected a filter option from there called all. But that's where we would create the filters that we just discussed. And then the results are going to appear in the main portion of this window. Now you'll see on the far left of the results, the first column is a small black triangle. That's because each user is actually a branch, and this triangle allows you to open the branch to see what's associated with that user. And here's where we're going to start to remember that hierarchy: users own hosts. So I've opened the second row down. I opened that branch up, and we see it's Mo Howard, and under Mo we have a registered host that's currently offline. We have a logged on host, and then we have a logged on host that is no longer online, but when it was, Mo was logged on to that. So we can see the association there between that user level and that host level. Now as we move across the column for Mo, we'll see we have his first name, his last name, his user ID, his email address. We could have his phone number, any of that user information we may have gathered. And at the bottom of the screen, we have a series of buttons that allow us to manage our hosts. We can add a new host, modify, delete, enable, disable hosts. And you will also notice the second column, the status column, that there are people with red shirts and people with blue shirts. A red shirt represents an admin user. So these are the administrative users with capabilities to log in to the Fortinac. The blue jacketed user is a standard network user. If we hover our mouse pointer over a user in the status column, the user information will come up in pop-up windows, and this will allow us to tag them and move them off to the side so that we can compare maybe the information across many of the users together. Now, I want to zoom in on one entry, and we'll get a breakdown of what we're looking at once we open that user branch up. So here we focused in on Mo, and we see in this example Mo has one system. The type is registered. That means this is owned by Mo. And we see the status of the host and the screen is lit up, means that host is online at this moment. We got the host name, and then we have the operating system of that host and any role that was assigned to that host. NAC default means that there is a role assigned, but that's the default role that's assigned to all things. And then on the far right, under actions, we have icons that allow us to take immediate actions now that we've found this particular user and host. And you'll see they, in the order they're listed there, is disable the host, which is going to take it off the network if it's been configured to, if the network FortiNAC's been configured for that. And then we have host properties, which is going to give us all the information that we have about that particular host. Then we have the group memberships of that host. So what groups is this host a member of? So remember we talked about groups in a previous session. And then we have the ability to scan the host, and that would leverage agent technology. So that would be a FortiNAC agent would scan the end station for compliance. We could send a message. This is a pop-up message to the host. This is only available if the host has the FortiNAC persistent agent installed on it. We can delete the host, and this will delete the host from the database. And then that last icon, the PC with the arrow pointing to the right, this allows us to drill down to the host level. So remember the hierarchy: users, hosts, applications, adapters. Well, we're at the user level now. That's going to allow us to drill down to the host level, or the host view, and it will be pre-filtered for this particular host. A right click on any column header in the view will allow us to decide which columns of information that we want to display. So there's a check mark next to all of the selected options. So you can really modify exactly what you're looking at within each of these different views. A right click on the user themselves, you'll see the very top option is user properties. That's normally, that's the most commonly selected option, so we put it right at the top, but that's going to give us access to the user property window, which we'll see in a moment. And then the next section is really what can we do to this user. We can delete the user, disable the user, enable the user, see what group memberships the user is part of, and modify the user, and so on. There's a policy details in there. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. We can set expirations and role values and so on. And then at the very bottom, we have collapse all or expand the selected. That's the tree structure in the original user view we just looked at. And a left click on any column header will sort on that column. So we can create a filter to narrow down, and then we can use a sort on a column to maybe organize what we've narrowed down even more. So here are our user properties. You'll see up at the top on the right we have a general area, which is general information about the user, their first name, their last name, their user ID. A lot of information pulled in, probably from Active Directory or LDAP. There's a role assignment if there has been one assigned. Security access attribute values can be placed there. And remember, we can leverage the role and the security access attribute values when it comes to security policies, which we'll talk about in another session. But that's really what those are for. We can enable or disable a user, meaning we don't want to allow a system they're logged into on the network, for example. And we can define the number of hosts a user can have associated to them as BYOD devices if we choose to. Address information would most likely be pulled from Active Directory or LDAP. And then down the bottom, we have a time area, and this is going to be the expiration time, if any, for this particular user. So we can set expiration based on a specific time and date. We can do an inactivity date and time, and so on, to decide when we want the FortiNAC to go ahead and remove this user. And you can use the set button to go in and configure that the way you'd like. And then at the bottom, we have a couple of tabs there to talk about. Registered hosts. This is going to show all hosts that are registered to, meaning owned by BYOD devices, most likely this particular user. And those host names that you see listed, there's one here, that is a link. So that can be clicked on, and it'll bring you directly to the host properties. And the next tab is the logged in hosts. and that host, that's any host that this user is being tracked as logged in on, not necessarily doesn't own that host necessarily. It could be a corporate asset that the user is logged in on. Those as well would be links that will bring us to those host properties. And there's a note field that we can go in and configure if you want to have information for a different administrative user or just to remind yourself at a later time. Okay, so that was the user view. Here's the host view, and it's going to look very, very similar because it works exactly in the same way. It's just one level down the hierarchy. So our filter capability over on the right is still there, and each of the rows is actually a branch that can be opened, but instead of being at the user level, we're at the host level. So that when we open the branch for a particular host, we see the adapters. So hosts own adapters, right? So the way we're looking at the hierarchy right now is user, host, adapter. The application view we'll look at the end. But so now we're at the host level. You can see I've opened up the second row and a couple of the other rows so that we can see the adapters associated with that particular host. The columns across each row or each row, the columns are all the different pieces of information we're going to be able to view about that particular host. And if we hover over the status column for any particular host, we're going to have a pop-up that gives us the information about that host. It can be pinned up, and we can line these up so we can compare multiple hosts together if we wanted to. And we can take actions on an adapter level at this point. So the buttons across the bottom of the screen are for taking actions at the host level: add a host, modify a host, delete a host, and so on. But let's zoom in on an entry just like we did before, and now we've got a host opened up, and here's the adapter within that host. And if the host had a wired and a wireless, we'd see two adapters. If the host had more, we'd see each of those adapters. And you can see, going from left to right, we have information about the adapter associated with this host: IP address, physical address, location, that's point of connection if it's currently connected to the network, which it is. You can tell it is because the adapter is green and not gray. And then on the far right, we see some actions we can take right from this view. So we could disable the adapter. We could disable, we could get adapter property information by clicking on the little green adapter. We could get port information or detailed properties about the port the adapter is currently connected to. And then just like in the user view being able to drill down to the host level, now we're at the host level. That little adapter with the green arrow pointing to the right will allow us to drill down to the adapter level, pre-filtered for just that adapter. So a question often asked here is, what is the difference between disabling a host and disabling an adapter? Well, when you disable a host, that will disable all adapters associated with that host. Where if you disable an individual adapter, that will only disable that adapter. So just like the user view, if you right-click on any column header, you can choose what columns of information are displayed for that particular view. If you right-click on a host entry, you can see you get access to host properties. And then you have a whole section of things we can do to that host. We can delete and disable and enable and look at the host's health information, policy detail information. We can send messages to the host, set a host expiration. And then below that, we can actually move backwards up the hierarchy. So we could go to the logged on user, things like that. And we could, below that, we could go backwards to what user is owns this device. If it were a BYOD or guest or contractor device, we could go backward to user property information, and then we can expand or collapse the tree structure in the view. And a left click on any column header will sort on the columns just like it does for the users. And just like users, hosts have properties. So under the general section, this is general information about the host. So you see we've got a host name, we could have a hardware type entered, we've got the operating system, we could gather a serial number and have that information there. We can enable or disable the host from that general portion. The timepiece works just like the user's expiration time. So this is expiration date or an inactivity time and so on, where this host could then be automatically purged from the database. Then we have our policy and our agent information below that. So a role, agent version information, the ability to update a persistent Fortinet agent if it's installed on that end station, which this one is. That's when you would see a version there next to agent version. That means that a persistent agent is installed on this system. And then we have a security access attribute value we can set there, or it could be pulled in from LDAP. And then under the registered section, you'll see the button there says modify. That means this host is currently registered, and that allows us to go in and modify really any of the settings for this registered host, as far as maybe what type of device it is and things like that. If this were a rogue host or an unknown host, that button would say register. So we could select that button to then manually register the host from this level. Across the bottom, we have a series of tabs. We have adapters, and this is going to list for us all the different adapters that are associated with this host. We can select any one of them, and we will go immediately to the properties of that adapter. We have past tests, and you'll see a couple tabs down are patch management. These are integrations with patch management products that Fortinet can integrate with. There's a note tab that we can enter note information. And then there's a health tab. That health tab is going to display all of the scan result information for scans performed by a Fortinet agent. And we're going to see that a little later on and see the level of detail we can get with that health tab. And then on the far right, we have our logged in users. So our logged in users are any users that are currently logged into this host, and those will be links as well to bring us to the properties of those users that are logged into these hosts. The adapter view is really the bottom of the hierarchy. So each of these rows, these aren't branches. We can't open these rows up because there's nothing below the adapter. So the first column shows us the adapter status, which we can hover over and get additional information just like we could in all the other views. And then we have the host status of the host that currently, or the host that owns that adapter. And then we have all our adapter information. We've got our IP, our physical address, other IPs this adapter may have on it, as well as, in some cases, historic IP information. And then we have our location details. So there's a lot of information, not only about the adapter, but we can also gather a lot of information about the host that owns the adapter at this level. So if I right-click on a column header, this is a really, really long list of columns. It's not only all the adapter-related information that we can display, but it's also all the host-related information as well as all the user-related information. So we can have a really, really comprehensive view at this level, because we can really gather everything from above it, display everything above it up the hierarchy chain. If we right-click on a column, on an entry on the adapter, we'll see we have the adapter properties. So that's always at the top, just like it was with users and hosts. And then the next section down is actions really that can be taken against the adapter or on the adapter: disable, enable, modify the adapters. We can go to the port properties if I want to get some details about the port that this adapter is currently connected. We got to show audit log. We'll talk about that a little later, but the audit log is going to show us any administrative configurations that have been carried out on this particular selected adapter. Then I have host control below that, enable host, disable host, just like we saw before. And then below that, I can go to the user information and change some user settings there, expiration role. And then at the very bottom, this is really, really a nice piece. At the very bottom of the adapter right-click option, you'll see we have Create Device Profiling Rule as one of the options. This is going to, remember our device profiling tool, this is going to build or assist us in building a new device profiling rule, and it will auto-populate that rule with information it knows, such as vendor OUI or DHCP fingerprint of this particular device. So if we know this is a device, a type of device that we want to build a rule for, that can be helpful to create our device profiling rule right from the adapter. We can also run an Nmap scan on it, and this is going to show us the scan results. This can also assist us with creation of a device profiling rule. And then at the very bottom in this view, we have test device profiling rule. So that allows us to choose an individual profiling rule we've already created and say, does this adapter and thus host match that particular rule? So that's a great tool if you're building your device profiling rules to test them against maybe not only ones you know should match, but maybe ones you want to make sure don't match. And that'll tell you whether or not the selected adapter and thus host matches or does not match the selected rule you've chosen to look at. So those are some really nice capabilities. There's another one you'd see. So this depends on whether it's a registered host or not a registered host. That right-click option here is on a registered host, because if it was an unregistered host, there would be another menu choice at the bottom, and that would be to reevaluate the rogue. So we do have the ability to go in and reevaluate any individual rogue if we wanted to against our device profiling rules. So if we added a new rule, we don't have to use that run button, remember, from Device Profiler, where we go in and evaluate all the different rogues. We can individually select rogues to reevaluate. And a left click, of course, will sort based on column. And just like all the other options, adapters have properties. So here are my adapter properties. There's not a lot of properties for an adapter, but you can see we can select the media type, wired, wireless, if it hasn't automatically been determined. So that's the user, host, and adapter visibility access. So and you can see they're all linked together, as we just saw, and there's a lot of information, a lot of visibility information is gathered from those views. Now, the one we haven't talked about yet is the application view. And the application view is a little bit different. First off, up at the top, you're going to see the filter option is different. So this uses a different method of filter configuration, where you select criteria, basically the column header, and then you put in the value you're looking for, and then you can build multiple layers, so to speak. You have multiple rows in your filter, and they are ANDed together. So I could filter for name, agent, and version 502, and it would narrow down to just those applications. So that's one difference, and why I talk about this a little out of order. And then the other thing is, once an application is learned, and applications are learned in two ways. A Fortinet agent has been run on the end station and reported back all installed applications, or there's an integration with the MDM and the application information has been pulled back from the MDM. Those are your two choices there. Now, once an application has been learned and added to this list, it does not go away unless it is manually deleted. So even if the host that had the application is gone, the application will still maintain here. You'll also notice that we have, right up at the top, we have agent, 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 agent. There's 4 different applications with the same name, and they're probably the same application. But if you look over at version, you'll see that 3 of those 4 have version 5.0.2. So that second one has a different version. So that's why it's on its own. Then if we go further to the right and you look under operating system, we see iOS, iPhone for the 3. So they're still the same there. But then we get to operating system version, and you see there's some differences now. The first agent with version 5.02 is from a system operating system 841, where the other ones are 901 and 902. So what I'm getting at is we are going to have a unique entry for each application, and that's going to include any difference between the app name, the app version, the operating system version, the source where it was gathered. So it's a very comprehensive list. Now, you'll see on the far left we have a threat score. So we do have the ability with a button on the bottom to set a threat override. So that can either be we trust it or we don't. If we select to trust it, behind the scenes the threat score is set to a 1, meaning it's a low threat. And if we set to consider it untrusted, it sets it to a 10, which is considered a high threat. So you can do that, and you would leverage that perhaps with policy later on. You could say, hey, if a host in my environment has an untrusted app, then I want to handle it in a particular way. Something else we can do here is if you right click on any one of the applications, you can do show hosts, and that's going to bring us back to the host view, pre-filtered only to hosts that have that particular application. And as one of the options under the host menu, when you right click on the host, one of the options you have there is the ability to go to the application view, which is this view, pre-filtered just for apps installed on that particular host. Now let's take a look at some of the user host management settings we can configure in the user interface. So I've gone under the system settings and selected the user host management folder on the left side. And the first option we see here is aging. So aging is how we determine, or how the Fortinet can be configured to purge users and hosts from the database after certain periods of time. This setting here is the global setting, so these settings will apply to all hosts in the system. So at the top you see we have unregistered hosts. So these are rogue devices, or devices that are unknown. Days valid is set to 30. That means when they are first seen and added to the database, they have 30 days before they'll be deleted. That's regardless of online or offline time. It's just 30 days from the point that they're added to the database, they'll be deleted from the database. And days inactive is consecutive days offline. So if the host were to connect, be added to the database, and then disconnect and not come back for 14 days, it would be purged from the database. Registered hosts is the next section, so we can treat them differently, has the same fields, days valid, days inactive. These settings are really very different depending upon the deployment. Very often in a university or school deployment, the days valid is set to a semester or a school year, and the days inactive is set to 20 days or something like that. But often in a corporate environment, the days valid is left blank, meaning never expire. I never want to expire my corporate assets. The days inactive might be set to 90. So if something's off the network that long, it's assumed that it is not coming back, it's been decommissioned or something like that. So different ways these can be used, but this is really just to keep the database cleaned up as cleaned up as possible. And at the bottom we can age out users. So we saw already that we can set aging values at the user level and the host level. We saw that in the property views just a few slides ago. And here we can age out the users, and also you see the checkbox right below that. We can remove all hosts that have been associated with the user. So this would be BYOD devices for guest contractors and things like that. Would be all those hosts would be purged as well as the users when the users time out. So here we can set aging at the group level. So host groups or user groups, we can go in and set that days valid and days inactive for all members of the group. So now you see we've got 3 different locations we can set aging. We can set aging globally through the system settings. We can set aging at the group level, as we see here. And we can set aging at the individual user or host level that we saw in the user and host properties. So what's the order? What takes precedence? And the answer is the more granular the setting, the higher the precedence. So if I have a global setting and then I set something at a group level and you're a member of that group, the aging values set for the group apply to the members and override the global setting. And if you set aging on a user or host level, that will override any group aging settings and any global aging settings. So the more granular the setting, the higher the setting priority is. The next option down is our allowed hosts. So this is BYOD devices. How many hosts do you want to allow an individual user record to have associated to them as a BYOD device, as a device that they've registered? And the default value is 1,000. Most people would cut that down a little. And then we have our MAC address exclusion option. So there are certain situations where a Windows system or multicast addresses can cause a single host to appear as a cloud in the administrative UI, because there's additional MAC addresses associated with the host, or seen, I should say, on the infrastructure on that port. And this doesn't give us necessarily an accurate representation of a single host being out there. So we can check those boxes there, and the Fortinet will ignore those addresses, those physical addresses, when it performs an L2 poll, so that it won't show a cloud of devices. It'll still only show the true single device connected there. We can add our own ranges of MAC addresses that we want to exclude here as well. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the logging tools and views, as well as the reporting capabilities with the Fortinet. Our first log is going to be the admin auditing log. So this is the log that tracks all configuration changes created or caused by administrative users. So whenever an administrative user makes any type of change in the UI, or just about any type of change, it is logged with the date and time the change was made, the user ID of the admin user that made the change, the action, so what type of change was it, a modification or a deletion, an addition, what type of element was impacted. So we see here a group, a host group was impacted, or a passive agent configuration was impacted. Then we have the name of the element that was impacted, and then a detailed summary of what was done. And this gets very, very granular. So this is great for forensic information. If you ever come into the UI and say, hey, who made that change? Or we didn't want that to happen, or or who made that change, that was a good catch, whatever reason, we can now come in here and use the filter up at the top, and we can say, okay, I know exactly who made that change and when they made it. So this is a really nice bit of logging for going back and finding out administrative changes within the product. The connection log is the logging of hosts as they connect and disconnect from the network. So when a host connects to the network, an initial connection time is logged, and information about the host and the owner of the host and the location and the IP and the physical address and all that is logged. And then when the host disconnects, meaning the host record in the Fortinet goes from an online to an offline state, a disconnect time is added, and that is the completion of the connection record, so that we can go and use this filter tool and answer questions like, okay, who had that address, who had that particular IP address last Wednesday at 3 a.m. We could go use our filter here and filter for last Wednesday, 3 a.m., and it'll come back and tell us the host that had it, where the host was connected, who was logged on to the host if we're tracking users, and all the other information about that connection that took place. So this is great for going back historically and finding connection details. Our event log. So an event is anything of note that occurs with the Fortinet, and it logs that event here. And this should be a first place we come when we're trying to troubleshoot anything, to make sure that, or to check to see what was logged if something has occurred. So there's approximately 300, 400, I'm going to say over 400 different events that could be posted here in this event view. Up at the top, you see we have a filter option, just like we do in a lot of these views. And we can go filter to a very specific period in time, for example, or filter for a very specific event or a particular element, and so on. And these events give us information. Now, events can also be mapped to generate alarms, which we'll see in a minute. So events are there for information for an administrator. Now, what events are generated or can be generated is configured in what's called the Event Management view, also under the Logs menu. So under Logs, Event Management, we're going to see a list of all the possible events that can be created. So in the title bar where it says Event Management, it shows you there's 438 different possible events that could be created on this Fortinet system. So there's a lot of different ones. Now, they're not all necessarily going to be generated by default, and it's up to you which events are generated. And there's a few other options you can configure. So if I were to select any particular event and use the option button down on the bottom left, I could select to disable the logging. So disabled logging means that event will never generate. This is often used for events that aren't necessarily considered important in a particular environment, or they happen too often and they're just noise and they're filling up our event view with information we don't see as relevant. We also have the ability to log internal. So that's the default for a lot of them. And that means when that event occurs, show it in the event view that we just saw on the previous slide. So any event set to log internally will show within that event view. We can log external. So external logging means we're going to send the event information. The Fortinet is going to send the event information to an upstream log receiver, another system. Could be a syslog server or something like that. Could be a SIM. We're going to send that information upstream. And then, of course, log internal and external is going to do both. It's going to log it to the event view, and then it's going to log it to the external log receiver. And we'll see where we set that up in a little bit. Something else we can do, and this is a really powerful piece, is we can filter when an event is generated based upon the element that caused the event to be generated. So you see there's a column called group, and that's where we can set a value. And then there's a column called group type right next to it. That's the type of group that would be associated with it. So what we can do is we can filter when an event occurs if the element that caused the event to occur is the member of a particular group. So let me give you an example, a very common example. One of the events that can be generated is called host connected. And by default, that event is disabled, because if you generate an event every time a host connects to the network, you're really going to fill your event view up fast, and it's just going to be noise. However, perhaps it would be really, really useful to know when a particular host connected to the network. So what you could do is you could go enable the host connected event, and you could set a group to a particular group of hosts. So let's say we had we created a host group called missing assets, and I could put particular hosts in that group. And if a host has gone missing, I could put it in that group, and then if that host ever reconnected to my environment, the event would immediately be generated that host reconnected, and that host connected event would include the connection, the point of connection, exactly where it connected. So that's a really common one I see used, is to find things that have gone missing so that we can go retrieve them. That's an example of how you could use that group to filter down when the event is generated. Up at the top, we have this event thresholds. This is going to be the Fortinet monitoring the Fortinet. So there are a series of events that will be generated when particular thresholds are exceeded, such as percentage of concurrent licenses in use, hardware usage. So these thresholds typically I wouldn't recommend they be changed. These are set by engineering, but there's our hardware thresholds, and then we also have software thresholds. So there are corresponding events to any of these. So these can be configured to generate the event. And as we'll see going forward, events can generate alarms, and alarms can take actions. We'll see that as we move forward through this section. But an action could be an email notification, for example. So if any of these thresholds is met, so if the Fortinet starts to identify that it's operating outside of normal or acceptable parameters, an event can be generated, which, as we'll see, can generate an alarm and an action. And an end user, an administrative user, for example, can be notified that something is operating outside of normal, what would be considered normal parameters. So perhaps something could be resolved before there's actually an issue. Alarms, also located under the logs menu, are really sort of elevated events. So any alarm that exists because an event caused it to occur. And we're going to see how we do that in a couple of slides. But an event is what triggers an alarm to occur. And alarms are a little bit different, but pretty similar to events. First off, alarms have a severity. So we have warning and informational and minor and critical. So we have different severities. And alarms can also be acknowledged, and an acknowledged date and time will be attached to the alarm so that we know perhaps another administrator has come in and is already working on resolving the issue. And an alarm can also be cleared, meaning it will be just deleted from the view so you won't see it anymore. So alarms are really, as I said, elevated events. So here's how we take an existing event and we have it generate an alarm, and then we can also have an action associated with that alarm when it generates. So I've gone under my logs menu again, and I've gone to my event to alarm mappings, and that's what we call this, is we're mapping an event to generate an alarm. So there's a whole list here, as you can see from the title bar, event to alarm mappings. It says total 56. So of those 400 plus possible events that could occur, 56 of those actually do cause alarms to be generated. So to create a new event to alarm mapping, you would click the add button that you see here, and we would get this add event mapping window. So I've enabled it. That just means I want to have the event occur or trigger an alarm. And then I have a trigger event drop down. Well, there's over 400 options in that drop down. That is every possible event that could be generated. So we select from that list of 400 which event we want to trigger this alarm. That's why it's called the trigger event. Then there's an alarm to assert. Well, the alarm to assert is going to be pre-named by the Fortinet, and normally the same name as the event that was selected, and that will be the alarm name. Then I can set my severity. So I've got critical, I've got warning, I've got minor, I've got informational. So I choose what severity level I want to assign. I can clear on an event. So that drop down will also have 400 plus events, and I can choose an event to clear this event. So let's say I have an alarm that's generated when the Fortinet loses contact with a particular switch that I've modeled in my topology view. That could generate the contact lost alarm. But maybe I want that alarm to auto clear if the Fortinet regains connection with that switch. So that's where we would use a clear on event. So I could have that the contact has been reestablished. Let's automatically clear the alarm because it's been resolved. Then you see we can send alarm to an external log host. That's to send the alarm information upstream. So remember, we could send event information upstream to an external source. Well, we can do the same with an alarm, and we do that by checking that box, send alarm to external log host. We can also send the alarm to a custom script. So if you were to go in through CLI on the Fortinet, there is a directory path /home/cm/scripts. And that's an empty directory. And you can put scripts in there. shell script, for example. And then it will become an available option from the drop down when you check that box. And if you select it, what will happen is when the alarm is executed, the script will be executed, or when the alarm occurs. Let's say that when the alarm occurs, the script will be executed, and the contents of the alarm will be passed to the script as standard input to the script. So what you would probably want to do to begin with is create a script that just outputs what it's been given as standard input. And then you'll see all the information, and it's all going to be comma separated, all the pieces of information from the alarm. And then you can write a script that can go in, parse the information from the alarm, and do anything you can script it to do. Then we see our apply to drop down. Well, this works just like the groups did in the event view. I can choose this to only generate if the cause of it was a particular host, for example, based on a host group I select from that drop-down. And then I have notify user options. So what you see there, it says help desk here. Those are administrator groups. So I created administrator groups in the Fortinet, and I populated those groups with different administrative users. And then from here, I can select any of those groups, and all members of the group will be notified via email or SMS when this alarm is generated. And then I have a rule type selection. And then options there are like single, which means every time the event occurs, the alarm occurs, or there could be a multiples. So I could say every fifth time the event occurs, generate the alarm. I could do a frequency, for example, is another option where when if the alarm occurs 3 times in 5 minutes or something like that, I could have if the event occurs 3 times in 5 minutes, for example, I could have the alarm then generated. But if it only occurred twice in 5 minutes, then it wouldn't generate the alarm. So everything from rule type up is mapping an event to generate an alarm. But then you'll see the next option down, there's a checkbox for action. So here's where we can tie an automated action to a particular alarm. So the flow would be an event occurs, the event causes the alarm to occur, and the alarm could then take an action. So when you check that box, there's a drop down to the right where we can select a whole host of different actions. So these are actions that could be notification actions, such as sending a message to an individual, or it could be a host access action where we could say disable that host, or we could disable a port, for example. Or in this case, I changed a host security action and said I want to set the host at risk, which, as we'll learn in an upcoming session, that means I could then have that host quarantined and have the host presented with a particular web page while it's in that quarantine situation. The only page it can get to is a web page I've designated. And to the right of setting it at risk, you see there was another drop down. I have content violation trap there. That is what's called an admin scan. And what that does is it defines that admin scan. We'll see how to make them, but that defines the web page that the quarantined host will be directed to regardless of where they try to go. And anytime you select an action like this, we can select to run a secondary task after a time delay. So in this case, after 2 minutes, the host would then be marked as safe and be returned to their production network and sort of let out of quarantine after a 2-minute period. We can add email message information here. If we are going to email an individual, we can add our message here if that was an action we chose to take, was to send an email, and that'll be for notification purposes. So for both events and alarms, we've talked about sending the information upstream. So what we need to do, it's a 2-step process, is we need to define the upstream log receivers. So this is the systems that the Fortinet will send the event and or alarm information to. And part of that process is going to be defining the format. And then the second thing we need to do is identify which events and alarms send that information upstream. We've already seen that. We already saw that at the event management level. We can say log externally, and at the alarm level, we can designate that we want to send it upstream as well. So here we'll just look at how I create those log receivers. And this is done from our system settings. So under the system menu, select settings. On the left-hand side, we have our system communication folder. And within that, I have selected my log receivers. And then over on the right, you see we've got one log receiver. You can have as many as you'd like. And you designate the IP address of where you want the Fortinet to send the information, the type, the options. You can are syslog or trap, the port. That'll fill in with a default for you, but you can change that. And the SNMP security string and the syslog facility can be set to whatever you'd like. But here is where we build those, or we set those upstream log receivers. If you have more than one, then anytime a designated event or alarm is generated to be sent upstream, it will send to each of them. Okay, some reporting. I'm still under the system settings, and here we've gone under the reports folder, and you'll see there's two entries under there. There's analytics and then local reporting. So this analytics piece has two pieces of information that can be configured, an activation key and a server URL. If you have the Fortinet analytics tool, appliance, or product, during the setup of that product, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is in a few slides here and show you some examples, but when you have that product and you configure and set up that Fortinet Analytics, it will generate an activation key and you will have a server URL. And that information can be placed here. And when you save the settings after filling these pieces in, that activation key, what that does is that activates a analytics agent that exists on the Fortinet. So that agent becomes active. And then the server URL defines for that agent what the analytics server is that it is supposed to talk to. And that agent can then initiate communication with the server. Now, as we'll talk about in a few slides here, the server, the analytics server, you log in there as an administrative user, and you can configure what information you want to receive from the Fortinet and at what interval, and that information will then be passed up to the analytics server from the Fortinet at the designated intervals. And we also have local reporting, and this is just some default preview report record limit, for example, and you see the scheduled report record limit, and we can remove reports that are older than a certain number of days, and we can remove reports when the directory exceeds a certain size. This is just, normally you wouldn't need to change these. This is just to prevent overutilizing the disk or filling the disk on the Fortinet. Okay, so Fortinet Analytics. The way this works is, as we just saw, you would set the analytics server up. Now, the analytics server could be hosted in the cloud through Amazon Web Services, or it could be a VM that's configured and set up on-premise. That's either option. That's for different environments. Some people want to have that cloud-based service they can access from anywhere and is automatically updated and things like that. Some maybe because of their industry or just as a preference, they want to keep all that information they're sending on premise. So they would set up their own in-house analytics server. And that server really consists of a data warehouse. So that's all the information, that's where it stores all that information that's being sent up from the Fortinet, and a reporting front end. And that reporting front end has some pre-canned reports, and then you can customize those reports to display whatever information you want. And the interface is a web-based interface. So the Fortinet over on the left sends the information up to the analytics server. The analytics server translates that information or takes it and fills it into the data warehouse. And then you can connect to the interface and you can begin your report customization with an endpoint inventory report, for example, endpoint compliance, network device inventory, connection logs, PCI compliance information is a dashboard that's available in there, and then we have security data that's been passed up. So we'll take a look at each of those. So when you log in to the analytics server, like I said, it's just a web-based login. Username and password, user accounts are managed on the analytics server. And you will have access to the dashboard. And from this dashboard across the top, you can do managerial tasks such as creating user accounts, scheduling when information will be retrieved, and so on. And then in the main portion of the dashboard here, you will see the high level of each of those different types of reports: endpoint inventory, compliance reporting, network device and ports, connection reports, PCI compliance reporting. There's also one off the screen, security information. So that's security alerts that have been received and processed from external sources such as firewalls like a FortiGate or something like that. From that dashboard, you can drill in. So here I've started to drill into the security summary. So I see I have security events and I have security alarms, and I see a number, how many were generated on a day-by-day basis that we see there in the charts. These are very high level, pre-canned. There's going to be to the right, there's going to be a key that tells you what the different colors mean. And then I can drill down into these to view additional details. So here I've drilled down one level to look at security event details. And again, there would be a key on the right to show you what type of security events and how many of each type have been generated for each day. I can drill down further on any individual day, and I can go in and see the number of events, and these are the different types of events. And now the color coding on the key to the right, that isn't in the screen here, but the color coding can be broken down by the host. So I can see which hosts were generating which types of alerts that were being sent to us from our security device. And then I can also go down into a table or detail view and get actual numbers on a host by host basis. So you can see the source IP on the left. These were internal hosts in my environment. And then on the right, the event description and how many were generated of that event description by these different hosts. So we can customize these reports. These weren't really customized, but we can customize reports and get a lot of information for one. And two, because this is a system that is designed for storing data, the FortiNAC itself isn't designed to store this huge amounts of data. This really lets us run reports based on a year or more, as much data as we want. As long as we have storage space, we can continue to save that data. And we can run a lot of interesting reports from it. So here's an example. This was a university, and what they did, real simple report they ran, was they wanted to see the number of hosts. These hosts have been broken up by the operating system, and they wanted to see over an entire year. So after they had been collecting the information for an entire year, they could run this, and you can see, based on the colors, how many hosts of each type. You also see the total number of hosts at the top. You can see that sometime right around December 30th, there was a huge spike of activity. So maybe there was an event going on or something like that. And then I think it's real easy to see when the school year ended and the hosts left, or the hosts were removed from the system. There was a dramatic drop off. And then over the summer, we can see the hosts all the time being categorized by the OS they were using, building back up towards the beginning of the next school year. So this allows us to do long-term reporting. We also have dashboards. And these dashboards are pre-created reports that allow you to very simply just click on different report types and get breakdowns of information. And this is called the PCI compliance detail. This is just to assist you in validating that your organization is in PCI compliance. And it uses a lot of different tools. This example right here is just showing the FortiNAC agent versions that are communicating back in a particular environment, and it's pie charted down to see how many have an agent of a different version. So we see 50% of our agents out there in this small sample are of one particular version, and there's a total of 4 different agent versions in our environment. But we can just move across the top and click on these different like historical policy scans and ports by role and so forth, these different pre-canned reports, and have quick and easy access to the information. So all of this stuff is Analytics Server, which is a different product. We also have onboard reporting. So with our onboard reporting, there's a lot fewer options on the types of reports that we can run. And some of these are going away. But right now, we have a templated report option, which is the screen capture on the left. And you see we can run guest registrations, and scan results reports. And when we run these are very high level. Templated reports are very high level. And when we run these, we select a data range. In this case, I chose 1 hour, and an end time. And the report that's going to run is going to start at the end time and gather data backwards for that data range, so 1 day backwards, and then generate a pre-canned report. So very high level reports, but they can be exported in HTML, CSV, XML, PDF, and they can also be automatically distributed to any members of an administrative group, for example. So I could have a weekly report run that tallies or creates a report based on the previous week, and then have that automatically sent off to a group of administrators every Friday, for example. Now the custom report options, which is the next tab down, that's the right-hand screen capture. You have different options. We have registrations, but we also have registration failures. We still have our scan results, but we also have a connection logs option. And these allow us to go in and customize the output a little bit more, be a little more granular on what information is shown. So a more detailed report. And these can be scheduled and exported in the same formats, and they can also be sent off just like the templated reports can be once they're run. Now over on the left, you also see there's an archives tab. This is going to show us a list of all of our archived or reports that have run previously. So every time you run a report, it gets added into the archived view. Compliance reports are pre-canned reports that you can run just by clicking on the URL that you see, the name of the report, which is really a link. Agent versions, for example, if you click on the name, that will auto-run that pre-canned report. And these reports can be downloaded with the green square with the arrow in it. And they're downloaded in RPT format, can be opened in Crystal, can be customized, and can be uploaded through the Crystal tab. Now, having said that, this particular view right here, this compliance option as well as the Crystal option, are both being deprecated. So those will not be available soon in a future release. And another type of logging is our audit log that we already saw, but we saw it under the logs menu, where we can then go and use a filter to look at information about what administrative users had made changes. Well, we can also go to any of the elements listed there: a group element, an event, an alarm, a topology view, entity, a users, hosts, adapters, all pretty much everywhere. We can go and just right click, and you will see a show audit log option in the right click menu. And when you select that option, you will get detailed information about what changed and who made the change for that particular element. So it's pre-filtered for you. This makes it very, very simple to go and answer questions like, hey, who added these ports to a particular group? You could just go to the group and right click and say select show audit log, and it's going to show you every administrative change that's been made to that group. And then you could just look through that list and say, okay, here's where those ports were added. So this is a great method of quickly seeing all administrative updates that have been changed to just about anything within the UI. And that concludes this session.